Good afternoon. My name is Mateusz Litewski. Welcome to another Climate for Growth live online debate. Today with us is Ms. Katarzyna Reiter, who is a project manager at the Center for International Relations. She is also a climate and energy policy expert, and we will spend the next hour talking and discussing the different views, different positions within the EU on the EU climate and energy policy. We will be with you for about an hour. You can ask questions or direct your comments to our guest through Twitter by using the hashtag Climate for Growth. Your tweets will appear underneath the stream on our website. And I will bring these questions to our guests. Welcome again. Please join us in the debate, and I hand over to our guest.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation, and congratulate on the Climate for Growth project. I appreciate the importance of this project as we have discussed it. There have not been many initiatives which are trying to reach out to the Polish and international public with the views which present the 2030 energy package and the climate change negotiations, where Poland is currently having such an important role as the president of the UNFCC convention. So congratulate on the initiative. What is important for me in the current moment is the negotiations on the 2030 energy package, which is the second climate and energy package to be adopted. Now, the question is when it is to be adopted and what will be the positions of the member states, and in particular what will be the position of the Polish government. That's not only the question that we ask ourselves in Poland, that's the question that also the international media and international politicians ask themselves following the comments of the Polish politicians. Having had experience with the first climate and energy package, which is the 2020 targets, we know that it is politically and economically important. Economically, because our industry, very broadly seen, experienced the results of these decisions. Politically, because we have seen that politicians of two key parties, up till today, let's say, discuss who is to take the blame for the decisions taken at that time. And was the decisions adopted at the March 2007, when Law and Justice was in power, or is it the civic platform government when in 2008 the legal framework was adopted? It shows the gravity of the decisions that we are facing now. Poland and the Polish industry and also the politicians were not and are not very happy with the outcome of the 2020 energy packet, and now we have an opportunity to do it differently. At that time, it could be said that Poland was a beginner at the EU. We were just 3 years. We could name ourselves not an experienced players. Today, when Minister Radosław Sikorski is in Ukraine, jointly with the German Foreign Minister Frank-Walter Steinmeier and the French Foreign Minister Laurent Fabius, we cannot afford to say we are not experienced player. We are an important player, and we want to be seen as such an important player. As a consequence, noblesse oblige, we have to play out to the standards we want to be judged upon. Therefore, I believe that it is extremely important that our government prepares itself very well for the debate we are facing. Prepare well meaning has the appropriate analysis, because to convince our partners we need to provide hard data. Luckily, Poland does have good analytical organism. For instance, the Kobize is a very competent group of analysts. Also, we need to simply have that hard data, go and discuss. It is known that Poland is the country which has the most use of coal in the EU. In this sense, we are special. However, we, as the Polish government, also need to be aware that we are one out of the 28. So we need to reach the agreement, as I cannot imagine that we would like to say opt out or coal. We do not want to corner ourselves to this position. So, but I do trust we do have very competent politicians, we have good analysts, so just the job is in front of us.
Okay, thank you for the opening. Like you said, we're one of 28 countries, 28 positions. Different countries are at different stages of reaching targets, setting targets, increasing the share of renewables in their energy consumption, the energy production. Is there, in your perspective, as a member of a think tank organization, do you see a lot of unity among the member states? Are they unified, or will it be difficult to reach a unified position?
As we read, recently Bloomberg have announced to its readers that Polish government is still considering placing a veto, which shows that we are considering reaching out for a hard weapon, which shows that, answering directly to your question, there's not unity there yet. However, we are just at the beginning of the negotiations, and we are all the member states are preparing for the March European Council. And there are some member states which are saying that the final decision should be reached already at the March European Council. As already mentioned, the French Foreign Minister Laurent Fabius said the targets should be immediately adopted. But we can understand the French positions. They are the host of the 21st COP in Paris in 2015. So they do have good reasons to speed up to say we need to speed up the decisions. And everyone knows that in September there is this summit organized by Ban Ki-moon. So some EU politicians want to go already to the September summit with some targets that we can declare. On the other hand, Poland is seen as the head of the camp who is saying, first, let's negotiate at the global level, let's see what is the global outcome, and then adopt the targets binding for the EU. So it already shows you that there is no unity there yet. On the other hand, it is the start of the negotiations, and there is definitely the room to reach the consensus.
Mm-hmm. Like you said, there are great differences in circumstances of different member states when it comes to setting targets and ambitions for EU climate policy. Is this the main reason for the differentiation in these positions among EU member states, or what lies at the core of the wide range of positions?
I believe it is a bit philosophical question. Shall we be the leader, and shall we lead by example? That has been the European approach to the climate change policy. And this has been a successful strategy for a number of years. And before Copenhagen, the European climate change policy was one of the best products, let's say, that the EU was recognized for in the world, and we were really looked up and followed to some extent. So it is not an ungrounded approach. Yet the situation has changed in the last number of years, and not only due to the economical crisis, but also due to the shale gas revolution in the US. So the circumstances have changed, and the question is, are we still, can we still lead by example, and shall we still lead by the example, or shall we rather say, let's take a global effort to globally aim for the climate protection?
Well, this is a pretty topical kind of academic discussion, really, because, like you said, leading by example has been the kind of the motivation behind the last package. Like you said, the circumstances, the global circumstances, considerations have changed. The economic situation, the rise of emissions in China, etc. So on the one hand, clearly Europe has historically played a big part in important policies and movements globally, but given that climate is a global issue, it seems that Europe really should also try to do what it has done best in the past, build bridges, find common ground. Do you think that Europe has a part to play here to also support the global negotiations?
We are currently doing so, let's say, firstly by the person of the president of the UNFCC, UNFCC convention, meaning the Minister Marcin Korolec, who is currently, since COP19, meaning since the COP in Warsaw, to the next COP21 in Lima in Peru, he is in charge, let's say, of the whole climate change convention. So it is a situation where, on one hand, it is a great responsibility. It's a very demanding job. But on the other hand, it gives him the possibility to listen to the positions of all the players involved in the negotiations. He's the first one to hear them, and he's the first one to hear not only the positions, but also the motivations behind them, and to try to build bridges. And Minister Korolec is a very experienced negotiator, and he is definitely traveling nowadays a lot, as it is demanded by this kind of job. So this gives the whole EU the advantage that he, having heard what all the players say to him directly, he can pass this message at the council level to all the colleagues in the EU, which means that there is a very direct transition path between the UNFCC convention, all the interested players, and the European Union as a whole.
Okay, so that in terms of globally, okay, but again, coming back to the EU, what would you say are the main kind of obstacles or problems lying ahead of coming forward with a unified, inclusive package?
It's now a question when the EU will adopt its targets. Some, as we have mentioned, expect that the targets will be already adopted by the March European Council. However, President Van Rompuy has already hinted that it will be the first discussion. So I do not expect that there will be binding decisions taken at the March Council. Then it is a question by when does the EU prepare its negotiating position. And the EU negotiating position will depend on the targets agreed for the 2030 energy package. I believe that the latest moment by which the EU will make its opinion public arises from the so-called ADP decisions, which is at the climate COP announced that the commitments shall be announced as early as possible, the latest by the first quarter of 2015. And I think that that's the date, the latest the EU is going to announce its position, still seeing itself as a leader in most of the eyes of the member states. I cannot imagine that the EU will not observe this date.
Speaking about climate policy and the EU positions, and coming back to what you said about Poland and about there being 28 positions, these are also not set in stone. As we've said, the global situation has changed, but have individual positions of member states changed over the past years since between the last package maybe and working on this new package now?
I do think that some of the architecture has changed. Firstly, when the first climate and energy package was being adopted, I said at the beginning that Poland was a new member state, yet we were one out of 10 new member states, meaning that basically half of the EU were new member states. Now those countries are experienced for 10 years of their EU membership. So it changes their positions, the way they can play out. Poland has also learned to build coalitions, which it was not so fit at the beginning. And before Poland joined the EU, it seemed to be important that we had the Visegrad group. But then at the beginning of our membership in the EU, we thought it's not important anymore. Now back we see that all the politicians from the Visegrad group appreciate its importance, and we do see also that Poland is trying to build around this group its support for its 2030 position. So that's one change. Another change is also that there has been an important change in the policy of the German government, which while the 2020 energy package was being adopted, it had very strong nuclear power use, and then it obviously already at the time had some renewables. Yet now, as it is phasing out basically its nuclear and has closed a lot of nuclear power stations, it is not probably so aggressively against the use of coal. However, it is just a temporary situation for Germany as I see it. Yet it is some change.
At the same time, Germany is opening in the next few years a number of traditional power plants, which may have been inconceivable some years ago.
Yes, that's what I'm hinting at. On the other hand, there is a very clear nationwide consensus that the renewables are the way forward. So I don't think that it is a dramatic change of the German position. There is just a change in the accents. And yes, it is not less vocally critical about coal, but it doesn't change its global big strategy.
Just thinking about trying to again put the EU positions in the context of the global negotiations. Sometimes it's a bit problematic for the EU to speak with one voice on a forum where also its national interests are represented. Do you think that the EU has a lot to kind of contribute to the process, acting as one in the global negotiations?
When we count the emissions, the global emissions, you have statistics for the whole EU. We know that the global emissions for the EU are 11%, for the USA it's 16%, for China around 29%, which already shows to you that even in the global statistics of the CO2 emissions, EU is treated like one block. Mm-hmm. And in our negotiations, we are speaking with one voice. It has been, and it's not only on the forum of the climate change negotiations. I was participating in the Rio Plus 20 which is the global summit on sustainability. All the fora that the EU is participating in, it needs to speak with one voice. It's the consequence of adoption of the treaties as we have them now. So regardless how much energy it costs and how time-consuming it is and how ununderstandable it is for our external partners, that we next to the global negotiations where we spend hours, the EU member states are spending extra hours preparing its positions, but we do have mechanisms and we do have also understanding that the EU needs to speak with one voice.
On a global scale, what about the EU taking into account the global process of negotiations when formulating its own targets? We had a debate with Professor Želić in December, and he was quite critical of this negotiation approach because he said that at a global level, these are negotiations, and by adopting positions before these negotiations are actually even halfway completed, we are kind of giving away our negotiation position and not leaving much to negotiate over.
I understand that you are hinting at something which is clearly expressed in the Polish governmental position to the green paper that the Commission issued about the 2030 energy package. And there indeed Poland says that it does not, despite the fact that it is asked, as all the 28 member states, what are our preferred targets, the Polish government answers that we want to make our targets dependent on the outcome of the global negotiations. Mm-hmm. And indeed, Poland is not the only member state which uses this argument. Also, Lithuania, for instance, says it should be dependent, the results shall be dependent on the analysis. Romania says that the targets shall be not higher than currently, mm-hmm. unless there is the global agreement. I was most puzzled by the Cyprus position, which says that the EU should have non-binding targets at all, and that the targets should be dependent on the financial situation of the member states. That's the most special position that I have come across. So it is about the strategy. Shall we first adopt the targets internally as the EU bloc, and then with these targets go to the negotiation table in Paris, or shall we keep our cards closed and announce the targets there? But as I mentioned, there is this ADP decision from the COP19 where the countries are invited to announce their commitments as early as possible, the latest by the first quarter of 2015. And I believe the EU will observe this invitation. And having seen how the internal EU negotiations look like, I cannot imagine that we can afford to go to Paris and try to decide on our position on the spot. We need to have the global guidance from the EU ministers or the EU heads of state and government before we go to Paris.
Well, COP19 agreed this kind of deadline with Lima in the middle, and then to have the positions ready and try to iron out an agreement in Paris. I'll ask your personal opinion. Do you think that Paris will produce what we all hoped Paris will?
I think there will be no second Copenhagen. So all the leaders are too prudent and have learned their lesson. So I do not. The success of Copenhagen was basically announced before we went to Copenhagen, and because all the global heads of states and governments believed it will be a success, they all went there. All big names, President Barack Obama and President Sarkozy, they all went there because the success was obvious. Now no one has this. The strategy is completely different. We are more moderate about our expectations, and then whatever comes out, we announce it as a success. So from this sense,
managing expectations.
Yes, I think we will reach some kind of agreement in Paris, and it will be announced as a success, and no one will repeat the Copenhagen situation.
Well, we've mentioned COP19 in Warsaw, which I think the same strategy was used. Kind of, nobody was kind of advertising it as a guaranteed success, and then we were satisfied with the progress that was made. What do you think was the most important outcome of COP19?
I think the most important is that we did have the outcome as a whole. As you know, there were quite some difficult political situations in the backyard, so to say, that during the COP19, and it was used against the presidency, that trying to blame the presidency that the internal Polish situation influences the slow negotiations, and that and the fact that we did have agreement and is already a success, and we do have on the loss and damage, we have some agreement. We have the way forward. Of course, it was discussed whether we have commitments vis-à-vis obligations, and the language used at the COP19 was not probably so satisfactory. Yet the fact that we do have the path to go forward to Lima and Paris, it's the sufficient success of the COP.
Well, as our previous debate guest put it, when there is a good compromise is when neither side is satisfied. So I guess that would work here. Kind of coming back to our Climate for Growth campaign and what we are trying to accomplish with encouraging debate. We also want to think about the competitiveness of climate policy and of the EU as a bloc, because many different positions would argue that growth and climate protection are at odds with each other. But as examples from around the world and even from Poland show, you can still grow and you can still reduce your emissions and increase energy efficiency, etc. I would just like to hear some of your thoughts on this.
Thank you for this question. I indeed think it is a very important question, and when you read the positions of the EU member states for the 2030 energy package, you do see that most of them say we want competitiveness. We want to keep up the competitiveness of our economies. And not only it is the Polish position, but also you can see it in the French papers, in the all the Baltic states papers, but also, for instance, Sweden also says so. So it is, I was even thinking, actually everyone agrees we want to have a competitive economy. It's only a question how we will reach, what will be the strategy for reaching this competitiveness that we all want to have. Also, the International Energy Agency is warning the EU as a whole bloc that actually with the current energy prices we are losing our competitiveness, and that the shale gas revolutions in the US makes us as the EU lagging behind. The EIA suggests that the way forward, the best strategy is the increased energy efficiency. Yet, as you know, in the EU proposal, as it is currently on the table, there is no target for the energy efficiency. Let's see if it will stay this way, because there are still some member states which do believe energy efficiency is important, and Poland was one of among them as well. So still, yes, competitiveness, actually everyone agrees. Secondly, let's see what will be the outcome of the 2030 negotiations.
Mm-hmm. In terms of green growth, we had this week a discussion panel in Berlin, and Professor Eggenhofer from the Center for European Policy Studies was actually pointing to the fact that despite the economic crisis, spending on research and development within the EU has actually doubled. Obviously not only on green growth, but it shows that the will is there. But on the other hand, we must keep in mind that it's very costly, and the effects are not immediate. The effects take time. This is also the same for energy efficiency, particularly I think for a country like Poland, which has old infrastructure and old buildings, and at the same time, Poland has achieved quite a lot in the last 20 years in not only in reducing emissions, but also on energy efficiency. Do you think there is still potential for Poland to grow in this area?
Regarding your comment about the Polish reduction of the emissions, yes, indeed, we reduced our emissions by probably 30% in comparison to 1988, because that's our base year that we calculate our reductions against. So yes, Poland is actually one of the member states that cut its emissions most in the given period. On the other hand, everyone immediately says, yes, it has been also the time when the most polluting companies have been closed. On the other hand, we are now at the moment when we need to when the sort of low-hanging fruits have been used. So now we need to reach out further. And indeed, Poland is trying to go in the direction of the innovation. There is, for instance, an attractive program called Greenivo by the Polish Ministry of the Environment, where Polish innovative green companies are being supported. So I think we should congratulate the Polish government on this program. On the energy and research, I do not know the number how high the Polish spendings currently are. However, on the EU global front, it's easy to explain why the spendings on the research and development in the EU as a whole have increased despite the economic crisis. Simply, it is the priority of the EU as a whole. And also, it's one of the questions that the member states were asked to say in their positions for the Green Paper on the 2030, how they would like the research and development be, which direction it shall go, because it's clear we need it. It's a question about the sources, where it comes from, and how the sources need to be spent. But yes, it is the priority of the EU as a whole.
And perhaps this is also the road that can help EU maintain its leadership in terms of innovation, in terms of new technologies, because there are still, before we started, we were also speaking about how, for example, there's the huge need for renewable energy storage, which would actually make, you know, help push this forward, which up until now we still haven't been able to succeed in.
Indeed, there are different new technologies that are there to develop, let's say, and unfortunately the EU does not seem to be the front runner in implementation of the new technologies. If you, for instance, look at China, of course, it has the higher pollutions globally, and its emissions has increased by 4% last year. On the other hand, the 4%, which is a huge increase, whereas the EU has reduced its emission by 1.3. But it is the lowest Chinese increase in emissions for the number of years. Why is that? Because they are very heavily investing in the green technologies. And when I had an opportunity speaking to Chinese delegation in the framework of the preparations for the Sustainability Summit, they told us, you want us to adopt green economy in the framework of the Sustainability Summit. You don't need to, because we will do it anyway. If it's adopted globally or not, it doesn't matter, because for us as a China, it is our national priority, and they are doing it. They are already using the clean coal technologies, CCS, which unfortunately we as the EU still have not come out of the experimental phase, and actually each project that has been launched is being closed. The Chinese are using a lot of photovoltaics. They are trying to use winds. They are the biggest, probably by now, windmill producers in the world. So yes, the
hydroelectric as well, with the dam.
So EU is an important player, and we want to see ourselves as the leader in the global negotiations. However, we maybe need to consider, and that's what the 2030 energy package is doing, how we want to use the resources we are having for research and development, and whether it is sufficient or we need more.
Especially given the fact that we are competing on a global market, and if we don't invest and we don't give incentives for the private sector to invest, to innovate, we are also at risk of losing this business going somewhere else that will support this. And you know, we often consider carbon leakage within the EU. Has this in fact been as big a problem as it's been kind of worried about, or is this taking place?
It is a very good question, because indeed the carbon leakage is an important theme which is mentioned in the positions of many member states. Many EU member states do worry about carbon leakage. I would say, in my eyes, France is actually the front runner and whistleblower saying carbon leakage, it's appearing and it's to our huge disadvantage. But Poland does express its worries as well. Yes, there is this under the theme of carbon leakage. We simply worry that our most energy extensive company, our most energy extensive industry will move outside of the EU, which firstly will lower the emissions in the member states, yet the emissions increase somewhere else, probably maybe even more, as the countries where the industry goes does not observe the high environmental standards. Then, as we need those products anyway, the transport back to the EU causes extra carbon footprint. So basically, the result is just exactly the opposite that we want to achieve. On the other hand, there has been an analysis last year done by some consultancy, but it was a kind of green consultancy, and the results of this analysis say that the carbon leakage is not as high as we worry, and that no company really has moved, not a single company has moved outside of the EU due to the...
just this one reason, probably.
Yes.
So it's usually a combination of...
So, but I haven't seen the Commission's analysis about it, and I think it would be the most credible if we could see such document.
Well, there's also been some talk of some countries outsourcing CO2, basically, moving some of their more polluting factories, industries outside of the EU, and therefore kind of reducing their overall emissions. But I think, I mean, this is my opinion, I think that this kind of shows that we really do need to strive for this global agreement, because this CO2 still exists, it's still in the atmosphere, and it still comes back in the products, basically, that we kind of produce somewhere else and bring back into the EU. The EU hasn't really addressed this on a big scale.
Other global players, I think, share our concern, because the US has managed to reduce its emissions by 12% in the last 5 years, I think, which means really a huge reduction. It shows that they do appreciate the importance of the reduction of the CO2 emissions. The single states of the USA have also adopted their own initiatives to either introduce the ETS on a small scale, or to introduce the support of the renewables, for instance. Also, China is doing a lot, as we have mentioned. The question only is that those big players, they do not want to commit to the global agreement. So they do appreciate the importance, they do something on their own, yet they just don't want to commit globally. And that's our as the EU problem.
It's also the problem of the global negotiations to try to achieve as much as possible, but also to make sure that it's as inclusive as possible, because it's easy for some countries, and this has been the case with the Kyoto Protocol, etc., which some countries basically say, no, we support climate protection, but we'll do it our way, not in no binding international agreements. I think given European diplomacy, I think maybe that this is an opportunity for the EU to kind of make up some of the global position ground that it has lost over the years, over the last few decades, looking more internally at its own problems.
It is a global trend, not only applicable to the climate change negotiations, that we ask ourselves how efficient the current global architecture is. For instance, I recently had an opportunity to discuss at some event with Pascal Lamy. I asked him the question, how do you see the future of the global trade negotiations, given that actually the two biggest economic blocs, being the USA and the EU, negotiate a bilateral agreement? It's completely against the idea of a global negotiation, such as the WTO. And he hasn't given a clear answer. And the same is true for the climate change negotiations. I want to believe that we will reach an agreement at Copenhagen, and that that there will be
in Paris.
Yes, in Paris, and that we will be able to continue on a global front, because it is already visible that there are discussions. Shall we also are the global UNFCC negotiations a good forum, or do we need a regional fora, or shall we have a bilateral forum? So it is simply a question about the global architecture, also the question about how the UN as a whole shall be constructed. So it is a bigger picture.
Well, especially given the recovery from the economic crisis, and no bloc and no state wanting to kind of jeopardize the progress that has been made. I mean, European politicians are just now coming out and saying that we may be over the hump, maybe the worst is behind us. I think stifling competitiveness is definitely one of the key concerns for European politicians on a European scale, but also domestically. I think no politician will want to be seen as being responsible for stopping the recovery. I think so. I think that this will be a key concern for the EU. I also wanted to, as we're coming to an end, I wanted to maybe touch on a bit of a controversial subject. You actually mentioned this before, the issue of shale gas. The European Commission proposal has kind of given a little door to this by not giving any overall restrictions, but this has been quite a controversial subject in the EU. Not going into the specific, I just wanted to know if you think this is truly an opportunity within the EU member states that have this possibility, as it has happened in the US. I mean, we all know what a success story the shale gas is in the US. Do you think Poland, the UK, can mimic this success?
It is also a question which appears actually in the framework of the 2030 discussions, because it's a question of the energy mix, and it's a question whether we can use the resources we have, the national resources, or do we need to import the resources such as gas, which is considered, or electricity from nuclear, which is considered the clean energy. As you said, the UK, Poland, but are the member states which are saying, leave us the room to explore this field, and in the Commission and in the European Parliament, there have been serious debates about it. The EU, for some moment, was giving hints that it might try to legislate on shale gas. However, it was all the time unclear what does legislating on shale gas mean. Shall we have some amendments to the current environmental legislation in the competence of the DG Environment, or shall we have some new legislation proposed by DG Energy? So finally, there have been no additional measures proposed. There was a very heated debate at the European Parliament. The Polish MEPs, jointly with the British MEPs, have done probably behind the scene a huge job to have the outcome we are currently having, meaning that there does not need to be an additional environmental impact assessment to the shale gas. So that's on the political and legal level. On the geological level, I do not dare to express myself, as I do not have the sufficient knowledge. However, it is, as I was told in the US, some of the areas where the shale gas is being extracted, it's those are huge areas where few people live. The people living there do have a right to use to have financial benefits from the fact that the shale gas is extracted there, which make it a bit special comparing to the EU conditions. On the other hand, the win we could have if the shale gas proves to be there and it proves to be feasible to extend it, that yes, maybe it is worth trying.
Okay. Well, just looking at the time, I think we are coming close to an end. So before I thank our audience, I wanted to thank you very much for your insight and for your support. Just wanted to know if you have any kind of last closing remarks you would like to kind of express.
No, actually, I do not have extra comments. I just would like to wish you further success in your campaign.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure hosting you here today. I would also like to thank our audience for tuning in, for joining us, for participating in the debate. Clearly, the EU climate policy is such a diverse and complex subject, touching on everything from social to political to economic to environmental things. I think we are entering a very interesting time between now and Paris. Let's hope the EU can work together and can further negotiate and work together. We hope our campaign, similar attempts within the EU can help support the debate, can help arrive at solutions. Yeah, with that in mind, I would like to thank everybody for joining us. The recording of this debate, if you missed it or if you would like to watch it again, will be available on our website in the archive part very soon. We also would like to invite you for another live online debate, which we will be organizing next week. It will be the final one within our campaign, and we will actually have two guests. The debate will be focused on discussing the outcomes of COP19 and their implications. The guests we will be hosting were directly involved in COP19. We will be hosting Mr. Tomasz Chruszczow, who was a lead negotiator of Poland in the process, and we will be hosting Mr. Arthur Runge-Metzger, Director of International and Climate Strategy at DG Klima. This will be taking place next Wednesday, 26th of February at noon. It will be available on our website to stream, and you can also participate. Saying that, again, I would like to thank our guests, thank our viewers, and wish you all a nice afternoon and a nice Friday evening. Thank you very much.